Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our November ACEware webinar about ACEweb INIs. Chuck, Jason, and I are glad you're spending some time with us this afternoon. Jason's going to be giving you a close-up look at some of the INI settings in just a moment. Remember that if you have questions during the session, type them in the chat box, and Chuck or I will get them to Jason for you. We are recording this session, and so we'll have it posted to our webinar archives tomorrow in case you want to revisit this a few times and or share with your team. So Jason, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you now.
All right, thank you, Sharon. And yes, welcome everyone to Keeping an Eye on Your ACEweb INIs, another title from the wacky, witty world of webinar titles. We always come up with something clever, I think. So let's take a quick look at what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to cover some of the basics of INI settings, what they are, where they're located, who and what access is required to make changes or add to them, and then some tips on making those changes. And then for our meat and potatoes, we're going to take a close look at some of our favorites, including some that are grouped by feature settings. So these are ones that will turn a feature or a function of ACEweb on or off. We're going to look at a few that change what columns or fields show up in different areas on ACEweb, as well as ones that can change some of that text and verbiage. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a couple that are some of our biggest, coolest, newest features that if you're not aware of, there are INI settings that directly control enabling or disabling those. So let's jump right in and talk about what INI settings are. Well, your ACEweb INI is an actual physical file, not a physical file, but it is a file located on your ACEweb server, and it has a number of essentially lines in it, which is the setting, an equal sign, and then whatever the value for that setting is. Last time I did a rough estimate, there's nearly 200 different total INI settings. So it's a pretty big file, and we're going to try and narrow it down to a few different categories that can help you kind of define or determine what settings do what. And the INI is short for initialization, and what that basically means is that when the ACEweb COM server is loaded, so when your ACEweb server starts up, it looks at that ACEweb INI and it says, okay, this is how I'm supposed to operate. This is how I'm supposed to work. And so if you hear about, making a change to your INI setting and it'll say something like you need to reload your COM servers for this to take effect, that's essentially what it means, is those are loaded into memory when your COM server initializes. So most changes will require that you reload that. We're going to talk more about that later, but if we break it down into 5 or so categories, you have behavioral settings. So these are the ones that turn features on and off, such as, do you allow waitlisting on ACEweb? You have your appearance INI settings, and these control how and when things are displayed, such as if you use data capture, do you want it to show up on the same enrollment page as all the other information, or do you want it to be a separate page that they have to click next to get to? So kind of an appearance thing. You have your verbiage settings, such as what shows up when a class is full when you're looking at your list of courses. You have some static variables. So these are ones like, who is your help person? What is the contact number for getting help on ACEweb? And they show up in a number of different places. And so it's much easier to just have these as one INI setting, and then that propagates to the rest of ACEweb wherever it's relevant. And then finally, you have your system settings. So these are the technical aspects. What is the data path to your database? What mail server is used. These ones are typically set and configured when you install ACEweb initially, and then you really don't ever need to change these or modify these unless you're doing a server migration or a server move, or you have some sort of a major system change. All right, so where can we find ACEweb INI settings? So again, it is in an actual file, and on the ACEweb server, if you're running just a standard installation, it's typically going to be in the inetpub/ACEweb folder. Now, You can go directly in, open up that file on the web server, and edit and make your changes there, but we strongly recommend that you actually use the INI editor, and that is accessed from your ACEweb admin page. If you've never been to your ACEweb admin page, we have an example here, but if you, in a web browser, basically go to your university's URL and then /wconnect/admin/awadmin.aspx, that is your base admin page. This is kind of where everything branches out from here. And in the top right of that page is the link to edit your ACEweb INI settings. Now, if you were to click that link, there's a few different things that may or may not happen. And actually, before you even get to this page, we're going to talk about who can access them. So your admin pages, that page we just looked at, might be secured with Windows authentication. So if your web server guys are real particular about who can access and view your admin pages, they may have those locked down. And before you even see that page, you'll get a pop-up that says, please enter your username and password. And this isn't a message being displayed on the page. This is a pop-up that's being displayed by your browser that's saying, hey, I can't let you see this page until you authenticate. So if you see that, it's likely that your administration team has put a Windows authentication on there. So you'll need that to bring up your admin page. And then when you click on the actual link to edit your ACEweb INI settings, you're going to be prompted for a student manager login. Now, this is a student manager staff login, obviously, and it's going to require specific access in the ACEweb access levels category. And so you can see in our picture here, the highlighted level here is, or the highlighted one is ACEweb, and it's set to a 6. Notice they're all set to 6s because this particular user is in the admin group. That will come into play in a couple other areas as well, such as we mentioned, if you have to reload your comm servers, you can only do that if you have a level 6 in the ACEweb access level category. But if you are really just kind of minutely divvying out the different access levels across your users, 2 is the minimum required to even view the ACEweb INI settings, and then level 4 would be required if you wanted to actually edit or make changes to any of those settings. And on the topic of making and saving your changes, it breaks down into basically 2 different types of data entry forms when you're looking at the INI editor. You have the drop-downs. These are going to be the ones that if it's an on and off setting, it's just basically you click the drop-down and you change it from on to off or vice versa. The other drop-downs are going to be ones that have hard-coded variables where you can pick from 1, 2, 3, or 4 or something like that. Most of the rest of them are going to be just a simple text box. And underneath that is going to be the description of what that setting is, any special notes, and a sample. So you can kind of see, well, what are some of the ways that I could configure this, or what am I supposed to put in this box? If the setting doesn't have a defaults to section down in the notes, then that setting being blank would mean that it's essentially disabled or it's inactive. So if a setting does have a defaults to, that setting can be left blank. And what will happen is it's going to use whatever is in the notes section down there in the defaults to. So you can leave that setting completely blank and it's still going to function and use whatever value is defined here. So in this example, this looks like it's maybe the schedule fields. It's going to show you these different values right here without entering anything in there. So let's say you wanted to just add one column or maybe take one column out. What you could do is copy this text from here to here, paste it in there, and then take out whatever field section or add in whatever field section you want, and that would be achieving the same thing. You wouldn't be able to just add in one extra field to this setting. You do have to, if you put anything in there, you've got to replace the whole shebang. Now, on the subject of making changes in that fashion, alternate interfaces are the exception to the rule. If you want to make changes to an alternate interface's INI, it actually needs to be done through the text editor. So essentially, you could do this either on the web server with a text editor, or if you do it through the ACEweb admin page, it's going to bring up the ACEweb INI text editor. One thing that you'll note is that there's no descriptions, there's no examples that you can use. So one thing I recommend is maybe have your main interface INI settings up on one page, and then have your edit alternate INI settings on another page. That way you can reference the actual, what the values could be. For the most part, your alternate interface INIs are going to be a copy of your main interface INI with just the changes for that particular interface. So that makes it a little bit easier. All right, so any questions so far on the basics, Sharon?
I'm not seeing any questions right now, Jason, but folks, if you have any, go ahead and type those in there. Just a minute. I do see one coming up here. Hang on just a second. Jason, can you go ahead and continue, and I'll get that question out to you in just a moment.
All right, so for our next section, we're going to be looking at those INI settings that turn a feature or function of ACEweb on or off. Now, all of the ones in this list, with the exception of the group option, are on-off settings. And this window out of the way here. All of these settings, with the exception of print course notes, are defaulted to off.
And continue. We'll circle back to that.
I'm hearing you now, Chuck.
Okay. Did you get that question? We were struggling to try to get it off to you, Jason.
I did not.
Okay. The question Suzanne was asking: repeat how you got to where you can edit the INI settings. If I'm a customer and I'm going in my ACEweb admin pages, if you've got a way to maybe go to live to do that, that would be probably handy. Here we go.
Okay, so if we go from the home page here, and you're on your ACEweb homepage, so you're looking at your home.htm, or really even any of your ACEweb pages that end in .awp, you'll know you're in the right place. All you have to do is come up here, and everything after wconnect, get rid of, and type in admin/awadmin.aspx. And that takes you to your main ACEweb administration page. I'd recommend that the person in charge of making these types of changes would have this page bookmarked because there are a lot of functionality things that you can do right from this page. But right from here, you click this link in the top right for Edit ACEweb INI Settings. And you can see I didn't have any authentication set, any Windows authentication, so there was no pop-up message saying, please enter a username and password. But it is going to ask me for my staff username for student manager users. So put in your
all right,
username.
that should be helpful. All right, thank you, Jason. And we'll keep on if there's other questions. Go ahead.
Let me jump back here. Maybe. Survey says.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, so we should be looking at taking a closer look. So again, these are the on-off settings that we wanted to talk about. These are some of our favorites. And again, all of these are defaulted to off when ACEweb is installed. So it's very possible that if you've never heard of these or if they've never been discussed with you or anything like that, that they're still just off and it's something that's available on ACEweb that you may or may not be using. So we'll jump right in, and our first entry is allow waitlist. So this is a big one. Waitlisting gives the opportunity for people that come across a full class to add their name to a waitlist and have the potential to get enrolled in that if someone were to cancel or refund or something like that. It also gives you the ability to follow up with people, let them know that, well, we have another one of these courses opening up sooner or later. Would you like to go ahead and get registered for that? This is a great feature for all the groups, people that have, free courses with memberships, or if you've got a really lenient refund policy. We've heard of people that go in and just sign up for pretty much everything and then pick the ones they want to keep and cancel or refund the rest. So waitlisting is your best defense against that. I've got a note here. The global waitlisting option. So if you set allow waitlist to on in your ACEweb INI, essentially that is enabling it. I'm sorry, if you set it to off in your ACEweb INI, that is globally disabling waitlisting on ACEweb. However, that can be individually overridden on the course screen on your ACEweb info tab by saying allow waitlisting yes. Now, we didn't realize, but there was a bug in all the builds, or at least in most of the builds prior to 51, where that functionality actually wasn't working. It wasn't allowing it to override. And so if you're not on at least 51, make sure you do get with your tech to get ACEweb updated so that you do have full functionality of that if you're going to enable waitlisting. Next on our list is Bill Firm. So this is kind of a neat one. Great for contract training, workforce development. If you've got, you're importing spreadsheets of people that are going to be taking a contract training class, and you've already got them in the system, and you've already tied a firm record to their name record. When they go on ACEweb, if you're allowing billing on ACEweb, then that billing or that invoice is going to automatically be directed to that firm record. So can save them a lot of time, saves you a lot of hassle without having to worry about multiple entries. If they're entering their own firm record, you may have different spellings or abbreviations. This is one of those ways that kind of streamlines things and selects that for the individual.
Jason, I'm going to ask a quick question right here. Number one, I did not realize we had this feature, so I'm glad I attended this thing. Folks, I'm going to ask you, raise your hand if you knew about this. Raise your hand if you allow billings on any of your courses through ACEweb. Raise your hand if you have billing allowed. All right, I only see a couple here. So everybody else, okay, Tracy, all right. Well, not very many, and that's fine. I was just so we got two of the group, Jason, that do billing, and for you two guys, you might want to take a look at that if you don't already know about that. So carry on. Thank you.
Okay, next on our list is print course notes. Now this one is defaulted to on for most installations, and essentially what it does is it displays whatever is in your course notes field on your course screen. So you can see on my example here in the note maybe printed on receipt box, whatever is in here is going to show up on the registration confirmation page. So as soon as they finish their enrollment, it's going to show on that page, as well as be included in that confirmation email. Very similar to print course notes is print reg warn. Now this one works pretty much the exact same way. If you have this set to on in your ACEweb INI, it's going to display the registration warning message on your registration confirmation page and also in that confirmation email. Now, I advise you to be cautious with this one if print reg warn is one of those fields in Student Manager that gives the pop-up. So when you go to that course, you'll get a pop-up of whatever message is displayed in print reg warn. We had an incident, I think many years back, where a place had been using this for kind of internal notation. Make sure you don't let Susie whatever register for this class because she never pays and blah, blah, blah. Be careful if you're using this for internal notes that if you do turn that on, you don't want that displayed to anyone that registers for the course. So just a heads up there. All right, next up is group option. Now, technically this one isn't really an on or an off, but because it defaults to 1, which is to display a single level of course groups, and most people would either say, okay, I want single or dual, it's kind of changing it from off to on for dual level groupings. That's the reason I included it in this category. So what this does is it essentially allows you to choose between single level groups or dual level groups. And if you haven't experienced this before, we'll show you some examples here. So in my examples, my course groups, I'm also using the graphical group listing. That's why you see pictures next to it. But on the left, we have the single course group option, which will have your course groups. And then when you click on one of those, you'll get the list of courses underneath those, which is what you see on the right there. If you set group option to 2, that's going to enable dual level grouping. So you'll have your major groups, which you see on the left. Under each major group, you'll see all of your minor groups. And then under those is where you'll see your list of courses. So if you've got a really big course lineup and you really need that breakdown in categories, then dual level grouping will save people a lot of time. Nobody likes to see, a list of 400 courses or have to scroll through a huge list to try and find what they're looking for. So this can really help out. All right, next up, Notify Office. So this is a fun one. If you set Notify Office to on, it's going to send an email to the staff members listed in the Office email settings. So it's a separate setting that dictates which staff members get the email. Notify OFC has to be set to on, and then if it is, whoever's in Office email will be the ones that get sent the transaction notice when events occur. Now, our description for this says when users create new accounts and enroll in courses, but wait, there's more. You may not know, but the Notify Office sends out these notices for all of these things on this list. So there are definitely quite a few. Some of the notable ones are going to be, obviously creating a name record, enrolling in the courses, requesting catalog information. So you've probably noticed those 2 checkboxes at the bottom of the sign up page that says, send me information on these interest areas or don't send me information. If they check that box and you have Notify Office on, then it's going to send an email to them saying, hey, we want catalog information for these particular interest areas. Now, the reason I have an asterisk there is another INI setting called Marketer Email. If you have an email address in the Marketer Email field, then catalog requests will go to that person and not your Notify Office. So that gives you the ability to kind of break those down. You don't want to be spammed and flooded with emails, so if you can kind of divvy those out to the right people, that can kind of cut down on that. Now, this is a big list of things, and so it should be mentioned that if you have a lot of web traffic, if you've got a lot of people signing up and registering for courses, and then you have 3 people listed in your Office email setting, then that's 3 times the emails just for staff. Not to mention the student is also going to get an email address. If they're proxy registering someone, then that's the student and whoever they're proxying, and then 3 staff members all get an email when the person creates an account, when they enroll in a course, if they add themselves to a wait list. So you can see where that overhead really kind of picks up as you have more people added to that list. So definitely keep that in mind, especially if you're on like a relay system where you have a limit of how many emails can go out, or if you're worried about being spam blocked or something like that, you may want to kind of scrutinize how you have that setting set up. All right, next on our list is dupe check. This is a fairly new one, and essentially all it does is it does one final check for a duplicate registration, which would be the same person in the same course on ACEweb when they get to that, before they get to that payment routine. It has a few different settings, which is 0 is disabled, which is how it's set by default. If you have it set to 1, it's just going to remove the duplicate entries from the cart. So if for some reason a person manages to defeat all of ACEweb's existing protections against signing up for the same course, this one will just sort of correct it and sweep it under the rug. Number 2 is duplicate entries are removed from the cart, but it does not check for previous registrations. So it's not going to be looking in the database saying, wait, have they ever taken this class before? Let me do a more thorough check. And both of those options, 2 and 4, are the ones that are really making ACEweb do a little bit more work on this dupe check process. So the disclaimer with this setting is only enable this if you are consistently getting these weird random bump in the night duplicate registrations and you've already talked to your tech about it and they've gone through all the troubleshooting steps, that would be the only time I would recommend enabling dupe check, just because it does add a little bit of overhead to ACEweb, and that's the last thing you want to do is kind of slow that process down.
Jason, so make sure it's clear, everybody knows ACEweb by default in its original mode should eliminate or should check for duplicates. But this is, if you would, a second, it's a recount of that, if you would, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So unless you have duplicate registrations, as Jason said, let's just leave this alone. So.
Exactly.
All right. Carry on.
All right. Next up, proxy reg. This one, well, it is an on or off, but for whatever reason, we have the drop-down options labeled as none or enabled. So keep that in mind when you're going to that setting. You're like, wait a minute, what does this mean? If you enable proxy registration, that is going to give your students the ability to register someone else and pay for that registration. They can also register themselves and someone else at the same time. It's a big feature package that we've been constantly improving over the years. So if you're not using proxy registration, definitely consider enabling that. This is another good one for contract training, workforce development. You know, if you've got a person that says, hey, I've got a list of 20 people that I need to register in these different classes, but I need to pay the bill for all of them, proxy registration is a great way to allow them to do that. It's also been kind of revamped in the past few years where we've allowed it to save the people that you've previously proxy registered so that they kind of show up. So if, you know, you're doing kids camps or something like that, and you've got parents registering children in after-school programs or summer camps, flute lessons, they don't have to keep, you know, searching for that name or anything like that. They can just select it from a list, which is a great time saver. So in the proxy reg process, both the person registering and the proxy are going to get that confirmation email, as well as anyone in your office email setting. And in Student Manager on the actual registration screen, the proxy registrar will be listed in red text there. So you do have a great way to be able to track that. Any other questions popped up so far?
No extra questions here.
Feedback from your mic.
Yeah, no questions here. Carry on.
All right. So our next section of INI settings that we're going to look at are the ones that allow you to either change or choose columns that show up in the different tables on ACEweb, or the ones that allow you to customize the verbiage or text. We're going to look at full message, which is the verbiage that you see in your course listing for classes that are full. Invoice message, this is the customizable verbiage on the billing on ACEweb side. And then the next three, schedule fields, transcript fields, and workshop fields, are the ones that determine what columns show up in those table areas. So schedule fields is for your main currently scheduled course listings. Transcript fields is when a student logs in, goes to their profile page, and looks at their history for current, completed, and upcoming courses. These are the fields that show in those columns. And then finally, workshop fields is one that shows on the workshop listing page. You may or may not have this as an option, and we'll discuss that once we get to it here. All right. Next on our list is full message. So again, this is the INI setting that controls what's displayed on the course listing page when your classes are full. So you can see in the example here, this is where the text shows up. This setting has the wonderful ability to use basic HTML tags so that you can kind of further customize that. So you could make the text bolded, or you could color it. You could do quite a bit of things. Just be careful, don't be crazy. I was playing around one day and tried to make a marquee box that had a background image and had the text bounce around and flash. And while it worked, it was somewhat distracting and it broke a couple of the other pages. So just be clear that it's a limited ability for basic HTML text there. Now, full message is the one that shows on the course listing page. The one that shows on the actual course status page is called verbose full message. So you can have two different messages there. You want something kind of succinct for your course listing, but then maybe something that gives a little bit more information on the actual course status page. All right, next we have invoice message. So again, this is the one where if you're enabling billing on ACEweb, it allows you to customize the message that shows up in both or on both the registration page and the confirmation page and email confirmation. So the registration page is once you click the proceed to checkout, that's where that's going to be. So if they've got bill firm set to on, then it's going to say, click here to have this billing directed to your firm. If you have bill firm off, then it's going to say an invoice will be sent to the above address, and that is typically populated by whatever the address is on that particular student's name record. And then again, you'll see the message on the confirmation page and the email confirmation, and you can customize that to however you're liking. Doesn't sound like a lot of you are using online billing, so probably not super applicable, but just know that it is there if you do want to customize that. All right, so let's jump into these fields options. These ones are the ones that control those columns. So you can see the column that we're looking at here, code, title, type, begins, ends, meets, fee. This is a very customizable setting that can really adapt to a number of different things. You can stick not just fields from your course table or the course UDFs, but you can put in if statements that look at conditional values that say, if this class is full and waitlisting is enabled, then say waitlist available in this column. So you can really use it to kind of customize the ability for students to get an at-a-glance view of a particular aspect of that course. The other thing to note is if you've got a recent build of ACEweb and you have the table sorter JavaScript, so if you see these little arrows here, that means you can sort by those columns. So depending on what you're using, if you have some value stored in a course user-defined field and you want people to be able to sort and order by those particular values, they can do that if you have it programmed into the schedule fields. So some of the other things it can do, again, we said course and course UDF fields. You can use the full fee option. So let's say you have a course that's got your main fee, but you have a particular additional fee that's a mandatory fee. They have to pay it. Well, you wouldn't want people griping and saying, hey, when I was looking at your listing of courses, this said $575, but then when I got to the checkout, it was $600 and I couldn't remove this fee for whatever this book is. If you want to just be upfront and make sure there's no questions there, you can use full fee, which will combine any mandatory fees, any mandatory additional fees on that course, roll that into the main fee and display it as one value. Kind of on the contrary, but similar is, let's say you want to do a comparative, a fee comparison. So if you have like memberships, you can display your non-member fee and your member fee to show how much of a discount they would get if they're a member. Or if you've got different fee setups like resident and non-resident, you can have two fee columns there, which is pretty cool. And then in our last example, it's kind of what I was talking about with the showing like a course status, where it's really however you want to dream it up. It can do a whole lot of things. So very cool. The next one in the field section is transcript field. So again, this is where a student logs into their profile and clicks on their history. And whether it's the completed courses, I believe this also applies to current and upcoming courses. This controls what fields show up here. So you can not only do course information, but you can pull stuff from the register table. So if you've got your super instructors or your course instructors logging in, entering grades into ACEweb with instructor access, then they can let their students know, hey, once I get your test graded, I'll give you a final grade, and you can go online here, go into your history, and pull up that course and check what your grade is. So really cool option here, and you can program that for a number of different fields. And I included this defaults to. This is the defaults to for transcript fields, and I wanted to kind of give you a breakdown of how these settings are entered in, because it follows a pretty specific pattern. It starts with the field name or function. So in our example here, we've got course name, and then you'll have a colon. Then you'll have the column label. So you can see title is our column label, but it's pulling in course name from the course table. Now your columns are separated with a semicolon. So from the next one, you've got co-beg date, which is your field, and then a colon, and then start, which is your title. And you just keep following that pattern, and obviously leave off the semicolon on the very last one because you don't need any after that. And there you go. So pretty simple to follow. I will say that you can get very complex with these. If we were to look at an example, let's go to our schedule fields. So you can see here, the description alone for schedule fields is more than a page. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do with this. You can manually set the column widths. Let's say you're going to limit this to, just a couple of fields, but you don't want the course title to break into 3 lines for your long courses. Well, you can set a manual column width that says, I want the course title to take up most of it, and then leave, X% for the fee. So again, you can really break that down. But like we were mentioning earlier, you can put in if statements to do conditional phrases, things like that. It's a very, very customizable field. Very, very cool. All right, let's get back to our slideshow here. Transcript fields, and finally is workshop fields. So workshop fields, again, it's the same fashion where you've got those field selectors. The main difference here is if you're using this newer tabbed course status design, so if you've got tabs instead of just a normal course status page that has your description, fees, location all on one page, then workshop fields isn't going to actually apply there. That would be done on the X course status template itself. So I kind of found out about this last minute, and I wanted to add that as sort of an addendum. But if you're using an older course status page, then workshop fields will control what shows up when they click that workshop listing link. Otherwise, it's set on their X course status template. All right, so before we get to our final section, any other questions popped up?
We had one question from the audience, and this was about proxy registration. When you are registering others, is there only a single email that can be used? Can you use multiple emails? When you're registering others, you have to use one email, or can multiple emails be used for those you're registering?
Great question. Yep. And there's actually a number of settings that can kind of go along and configure that. It really depends on how your user ID source setting is configured. So if you do allow multiple email addresses, then yes, you could use.
Okay, let me jump in, email. Jason and Sharon. I was looking at the question too. I think the question, and Melody clarify, is that if you're doing proxy reg, and this is where you have kids and parents, whether or not you can only proxy reg a list of names if their email matches yours. And the answer is no. You don't have to be like family members where you can only see the proxy people that have your same email. I think, Sharon, that's the question Melody will get on that. So, and then the answer is no. You can go get anybody's email that's in the system. It does not have to be one that you shared, like with a kid or a spouse.
Yep.
We get on that, Jason.
Yep.
And we'll see if we can get Melody. I got my questions up finally,
If that
Sharon.
doesn't answer Melody, then shoot me an email or shoot your text.
Sounds good.
We'll definitely.
All right. All right. Carry on.
All right. So our final section, taking a closer look at some of the newest features. These are the big ones, the pièce de résistance of the exciting new things that we've been adding to ACEweb. We're going to look at 2 settings. One is Manager Web Level, which is for the staff web access feature, and the other is the report certificate and report transcript INI settings. And those control that ACEweb Online ACEweb Student Online Reporting Module, or STORM. So the first one, Manager Web Level. This is the INI setting for Manager Web Level, and essentially all it does is sets the minimum level in the ACEweb access area for your staff members to be able to perform these Manager Web operations. So again, this is done under password maintenance. So if you're in Student Manager, you click Tools, you click Password Maintenance, and then you click Find whichever user you want to modify, and then set their ACEweb access level to whatever the desired level is. Now 0 is going to be disabled, so the Manager Web option is completely unavailable. If they try and use the Manager Web link, then it'll say this operation is not allowed. If you have it set anywhere from 2 to 6, then that has to correspond to that user's ACEweb access level on their password maintenance screen to be able to give them access to perform these operations. So staff web access. It's going to allow your staff members to do a whole bunch of things, all from a web browser with an internet connection. So even if you don't have remote desktop access to your server or back to your machine in the office, this is going to give you the ability to perform some of those key functions when you are away from the office. So a really, really cool feature. And just some of the things that it can do are you can have your staff create or look up the name records. You can enroll them in courses, and you don't need the password. You don't need to create a password if you're creating a record, and you don't need their password if it's an existing record, because you're going in as staff, just like if you were to look somebody up in Student Manager, you don't need to know that student's password. It's going to let them view course information, so more course information that you could just normally see by going to ACEweb and looking at the course status page. It's going to give you a little bit more info on what some of the fees are that are available, things like that. And then it's also going to give them that full super instructor access. So going in, being able to view and print their rosters, edit grade books, a whole bunch of things. So this is really a new spin on a feature that is really old. I don't know if we've got any veterans in the crowd, but anyone remember a feature called Road Warrior from way, way back in the day? Road Warrior was a way that you could kind of do this. So if you've got a conference or something and you want to be able to take bookings at the door, well, Road Warrior would allow you to kind of lock your courses in your database and then zip everything up and pack it on a laptop and then be able to register people at the door. Once you got back after the conference was over, you could kind of unpack that back into the database and it would update everything. But of course, locking all of your courses means no one back at the office can actually do anything with those. So this one is, real-time access that is directly accessing the database and gives you a whole bunch of freedom to do that.
Well, people are soaking that in. I'm going to ask you folks, raise your hand if you are using the new Manager Web Access, or at least have begun to experiment with it. Raise your hand. Anybody out there? Hey, yeah, all right, we got a couple. We got a couple of folks who have been, 3 folks in there. Good, good. All right, well, that's great. Again, send us feedback on that because certainly if there are some other things we could do to make that more useful, feel free to pass those along. So, all right, Jason, carry on.
I can't remember who it was, but I had a client that was migrating servers and their TouchNet rep wasn't responding quick enough to get the new server added to the allowed list, so they weren't able to make payments in Student Manager. However, they were still able to take payments on ACEweb. The students could register for the courses and pay for them just fine, but it was just trying those manager payments that weren't working. And so that's where Manager Web came through and allowed them to actually go in and register students, take the credit card payments right through the web access, and be able to kind of fill that hole until they were able to get their server added to that list. So I don't know if you saw, but to access Manager Web Access, you go to your ACEweb admin page, same place where the ACEweb INI settings link is, and then in the top right, you see Manager Web Access. Now you can actually bookmark right to this staff web access page. Simply go to the link and then add this to your favorites, but it's managerweb.awp. You can see I'm logged in as the ACEware technician right here, and we've got a number of options. You can look up your students, gives you a whole new interface where you can do, partial matches. If you want a kind of a hint on some of the things you can do, just click that name lookup instructions, and this gives you some examples of how you can search for things. So you could do CHHAV, just Chuck, I'm not sure which database. I guess you're not in this one, Chuck. So
I may be Charles. I may be actually Charles in this.
Sir Charles, maybe?
Sir Charles.
No.
Oh, really?
So, so if I go.
Well, no. Do you?
CHARHAV. Huh.
Try have CHA. Maybe it's last first. Yeah, there.
Could be. So anyway, you find your student, and what you do is click this button over here, and it's essentially you're now logging on as that student, again, without needing their password, but you're still logged on as your staff member as well. Up in the top here, you see AW Tech, that's me, and then you see the student as I was logged on. So from here, you could actually go in and look at their profile, make changes here if you wanted to. You could go to their history, perform any of these functions. But what we're going to do is enroll Charles in a course. So over here, once you've got a student logged in, it opens up this right-hand side with your student options. Do we want to enroll them in a course? Do we want to do quick pick registration? If you have the quick pick module, obviously, edit their name record, view their history, or log them off. So we can say enroll in a course. And this is just as if they were going in and enrolling in this class themselves. So you just click the links, follow the same path. Oh, it's restricted members only, so we'll go ahead and add that membership. And then we'll come back, and I can't remember which one I picked, but here we go. Enroll yourself. Now we've got two options on our cart. So I'll remember enrolling Chuck in improving communication with friends. Let's go ahead and proceed to check out. Now here's one of the cool things about Staff Web Access that really makes this neat. Because we're logged in as staff, and it's almost like we are sitting there at Student Manager and you've got a walk-in registration, if they want to pay with a cash or with a check, you can do that. But you can do that from anywhere. So again, if you're at a conference and you're taking registrations at the door and they want to pay cash, you have a cash box there. You simply take the payment, click cash, and then that transaction is completed and already in the database. You can they're emailed the receipts and they're good to go. So very, very cool feature. Staff Web Access is one that we're very proud of. So
I'll get that.
All right, next up on our list, if our screen comes back, report certificates and report transcript. These two INI settings control one small aspect of the ACEweb student online reporting module, STORM. So specifically what they do is tell ACEweb which additional reports to use when a student goes online to print out their certificate or their transcript. So what is STORM in a nutshell? It allows them to go into their history and depending on which option you have enabled or if you have both options enabled, allow them to get PDFs and either print them out or save them of their transcript as well as certificates. Now you can choose on a course-by-course basis which courses you want to be included on the transcript and also which ones you want them to be able to print certificates for. So obviously, when a person's in a course, it's technically they're in the course and sometimes the grade is already put in there by default. So you wouldn't want this something that is just enabled by default. So there's a lot of control on how they can or when they can go in and actually print those certificates. So you do have a lot of control there. So a student view of the STORM module, they go into their profile and on the same screen that you have the buttons that have always been there for current, completed, and upcoming courses or online courses, you've also got two new buttons here called My Certificates and My Transcript. And if we look at a quick example of that, let's see. I'm going to log Charles off. Let's go back and pick I think Teresa Alexander. All right, so even though I'm logged in as doing the staff web access, this would be the same if Teresa were to come and log into ACEweb all on her own. So we go to the profile and then we go to this history page and we click the My Transcript button. You can see it takes you to a PDF of that person's transcript. And these are the courses that I've selected in Student Manager that say it's okay for this to show up on transcripts. Obviously, if you're an OLLI group, you don't want like the membership courses to be on transcripts, or if there's donation courses or something, you'll be able to fine tune which ones actually show up. Now, one major thing to mention with this is this isn't something that you have to do separately for ACEweb and configure separately for ACEweb. This is built using the Student Manager's report module.
Are you still there? Oh, Jason. Oh, let me. Jason, you lost audio.
Test 1, 2. Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are good. Go ahead. All right. Thank you, folks. Thanks for waiting.
Sorry
we have
about
Jason
that.
back on the line.
The gerbils stopped spinning the hamster wheel downstairs, and we momentarily lost connectivity. So, Chuck, what was the last thing that we were?
Oh goodness, Sharon, I was mute. I think right at the beginning. Go back a couple of steps on your online your certificate. Where to get to the certificate?
We were looking at the transcripts. Teresa can come right here on ACEweb, go to their registration history, my transcript, and I'm not sure if you guys heard this or not, so bear with me, but it is using the Student Manager report module. It's not something separate that is created specifically for or on ACEweb. That is the same report in Student Manager that you would run if the person came in and they wanted a transcript printed out. So on the other side is the certificates. If they click that My Certificates button, it'll show all the courses that are eligible that you have enabled for online certificate printing. And they just simply click Get My Certificate, and there you go. They can print that out and stick it in a beautiful frame, hang it on their wall, and say, I made it through the application development seminar. And I am so proud of that. All right, so I do want to mention that there is a lot more to these modules than what we have time to discuss today. So with that being said, I'm going to show you guys a cool feature on the ACEware.com website. which is the webinar archive. Hopefully you guys have already been there and you know about this, but if not, this is our shameless plug. Clicking that will give you access to all of these live recordings that we do for these webinars. So if you want to download the PowerPoint, or if you want to, have your other staff members that couldn't attend to view the live webinar, we've got YouTube links that they can go and view those and get all of that information. So a whole wealth of info there. And as always, if you have questions on these specific things, or you are interested in getting those installed on ACEweb, get with your technician and they can arrange for a tour and schedule time to get that set up. So with that said, any last final questions?
I believe you've been keeping up with people. We've had a couple of questions come in that I think we've answered as we go, and appreciate the plug for the webinars. And again, we have 2 or 3 of Jason's on ACEweb. If you've got the live, let me ask, let me do, again, involvement. Raise your hand, attendees, if you have ever downloaded or looked at a webinar in archive. If you have looked at a webinar in the archive system, and I see hands popping up. Of course, this is preaching to the choir, Jason. We've got, well, great. We're almost 70%. That is great. So, all right. Let me see if there is one more question, if that's something that we want to notify. There's a question about whether or not, if there's anything that notifies you when a student transfers courses. And I think the issue there is that a student cannot transfer courses independently on ACEweb. So that would be something they go into staff. So that's a moot point. We don't allow currently students to transfer from course to course on ACEweb. Staff can do it, through the tool set, but students can't. So any other questions? Otherwise, we've had a good hour. There is more on, and again, Jason, you're also the keeper of the help guide. You might want to do a show of where that is, a course root software update. If you can you throw up the help guide and let people know that you can get help. You can get help on the on the INI settings in the help guide. So if you'll wait just a second, Jason will bring that up. And again, this is your online help guide that you can get from either Student Manager or your online reference guide on the website. But there are several sections in here that talk about ACEweb topics and the INI settings. So there's another great resource. So, Jason, you took us here. I think that okay, so you've got staff web access, but if you wanted to also look at INI settings, you've got more detail in here as well. So,
I do see one other question. I was finally able to dial back in and join everybody. There's a question about, similar to the table and field name directory that we have, is there any one for ACEweb and settings? Jason, do you have any guidance for that in the help guide?
Similar to the what was the?
No, I think it's a mapping, the
field
data mapping.
There's
not
the. What's it under?
Well, the ACEweb INI settings, of course, the fields in. It's kind of like getting into. You have to get into the HTML pages to actually see what fields you've got. Most of the INI settings that are referenced in the help guide really give you some help tips in there. And I guess kind of the question is, Jason, that when you're looking at INI settings, sometimes you have to use codes that Stein creates versus the native field names. And are those typically referenced in the tips when you open up one of these?
For the most part, all of the settings that you guys would be modifying, we've covered the bases, and as long as you're using the INI editor, all of the options that are available to you, the the how-tos and the samples and examples are right there on that setting, as well as in the online help. As you can see, we're in the ACEweb INI settings by alpha order. This is a list of all of those settings right here on the online help. But if it is a setting that is like a custom one, like I said, there's almost 200 settings in the ACEweb INI, and a good majority of those are going to be specific to specific places in specific functions that you may never ever touch. So all of the relevant ones are going to have the documentation right there in your ACEweb INI editor. As long as you are doing your ACEweb updates, that also gets updated when we put in new settings. You'll get a new file that updates those descriptions and options.
All right. I believe, Sharon, I think we have a question about some internal stuff, but I think we're good. Well, Jason, thank you much. Excellent job as usual. Sharon, I'll let you take us out the door.
Well, Jason had put up on the screen that we have a software update webinar coming the first week of December there, and I'll also tell you that we've made a special invitation for a webinar in December, so watch your email the first part of December when we kind of send the monthly activities for more information on that, and that conference registration will open in December. So, and then just like that, the year's over. So keep an eye open for our email the first week of December, and until then, we wish you all a very safe and happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next month. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.